The sound of Herefordshire and Worcestershire is
BBC Hereford and Worcester.
Hello, welcome along. Good morning to you. It's 17 minutes past 7. It's Tammy Gooding at breakfast. Now, there are so many ways to pay to park a car nowadays, aren't there? And, you know, you've got the apps, you've got coins only, you've got card only. The possibilities are endless. From today, though, there will be a number of changes to private parking rules in order to protect motorists. The new changes will address the 5-minute rules, which basically require people to pay for their parking within 5 minutes of arrival. Drivers who are now using private car parks, which are being monitored by ANPR, will have an extra safeguarding measure in place in case people experience delays in paying for the parking session, which can easily happen. You know, you can't get a signal or you don't have the correct change, that sort of thing. The new changes will be trying to give extra leeway for people who experience genuine difficulty paying for a parking session in a short space of time. But this doesn't apply to all car parks. And what's considered difficulty? It all sounds a bit confusing and a bit vague. So here to explain more is Scott Dixon from the Complaints Resolver. Morning, Scott.
Good morning, Tammy.
Thank you for coming on. What are these changes then, Scott?
Well, they've been brought in following Rosie Hudson's case where XL Parking issued court proceedings for £1,906, which was dropped. And she had problems getting a signal and paying within 5 minutes, which should never have been in place originally. And they're simply abolishing what should not have been in place. And the key updates from this new announcement are that you will not be penalised for delayed payments. And what they're saying is drivers using camera-monitored car parks, like those with ANPR, won't receive a penalty if they pay for parking before leaving. Fair treatment for genuine difficulties. And apparently the new code acknowledges situations where drivers face legitimate challenges like signal problems. And they're saying it's important to follow the signage within the car parks, and it's limited to ANPR cameras, which control most of the car parks anyway, private car parks. And even the CEO from the International Parking Community, he struggled to explain this on BBC Breakfast last Wednesday. And he said, we've put in place a panel that's reviewed this over the last month, and we're making the change today because it's the right thing to do. And he said there's a safeguard in place and mechanisms, but in reality, it's smoke and mirrors, Tammy. And there are no mechanisms in place because you have an ANPR camera which starts the clock when you enter the car park, and you have an ANPR camera at the exit which stops the clock when you leave. And there are no mechanisms in place to put this safeguard in implement it. You know, that's how I see it.
And that's the thing. Sometimes it's the vagaries of the way these things are written as well. I mean, do we have any idea what is considered a difficult circumstance that will allow this extra leeway? You know, what do you make of all of this?
Well, there's so many different scenarios, and I spoke on BBC local radio about this on the run-up to Christmas. For example, if you're caught in a traffic jam in a busy car park, and, you know, you may have delays finding a parking spot, and by the time you've read the terms and conditions on the signs, which from the contract that you're entering into, you're finding details of which app you need to download. There's so many different apps that you need to use. Installing the app, setting up an account, approving online banking verification, and making the payment quick enough, you can easily incur a parking charge notice. It's not a fine. It's simply an invoice for an alleged breach of contract for parking on private land. And even if you pay within a reasonable time frame, and they're saying if you pay for the time that you spent on the car park, you won't get a parking charge notice. But that's always been the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's the time that it takes to actually do all those steps that I mentioned that creates the parking charge notice. It's not the time spent in the parking spot.
Yeah, that's the thing, because as you say, there's a camera on the way in, there's a camera on the way out, so we know how long you've spent in there. So the bone of contention here is how long it takes you to pay. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's ridiculous, though, isn't it? Because if you're going to pay anyway, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and for example, if you're caught in a busy car park and you can't get past the exit camera, the contract was frustrated by impossibility. And I've got various templates on my website which cover all the legalese jargon and do all the hard work to cut through it for you. But essentially, this 5-minute rule, it was a breach of the Consumer Rights Act 2015, and it should never have been in place. And they've made a lot of money out of this over the years because people have never challenged it, or most people haven't challenged it. And it falls under Section 62 of the Consumer Rights Act 2015, which has a fairness test, and it requires terms to be fair and transparent. And if a term is unfair, it's not binding on the consumer. And I believe that applies to this arbitrary time frame set by the parking companies. So even if it stretches to 10 minutes and you've had all those problems to comply with that time frame, you could challenge it under the Consumer Rights Act 2015.
This is good news. This is good news that we finally are fighting back. And I guess, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the change in these rules all of a sudden is the fact that it only takes one to complain, and then suddenly the sheer number of cases will be coming up and say, that happened to me. And it gives people confidence then to step up themselves, doesn't it?
Yeah, bang on the money, Tammy, and that's what's happened. It's one high-profile case that's opened up the floodgates, and there's been a few others that have followed. And it's just a knee-jerk reaction to that. And what we need is a proper UK government code of practice put in place that can be legally enforced. And that was kicked out by the private parking industry in June 2022 with a legal challenge. And there's a lack of genuine regulation. And as I say, these new guidelines are just a response to media pressure. And the industry's self-regulation isn't enough to address the core issues. And the UK government code of practice, it would have included fairer measures like capping the charges and banning debt recovery fees. And it reflects the industry's resistance to real change. And as I say, it's not a fine. It's simply an invoice for an alleged breach of contract for parking on private land. But you can't ignore it. But equally, challenge it robustly. But if you're caught in a supermarket car park, for example, go to customer services, try and get it resolved that way rather than going with the parking operators, and get any confirmation put in writing.
Well, I think also what's really great is that folk can look at your website as well. You're the complaints resolver, and get some help there. And since you've helped us, I'd like to help you now. We've been talking about catalogues this morning there, Scott Dixon, and I've got my lovely Coopers of Stortford spring clearing solutions inside. There's all sorts going on in here, but I found something I think you might like a lot. And that is a Frolicking Bunnies set, the mood for spring. You've got 4 ceramic Frolicking Bunnies that you can put on your lawn for £19.99. How's that sound?
Well, I knew there was something missing in my life, and you've just found what it was.
I mean, you can put that next to the everlasting artificial primrose picks that you can stick on your fence. So there you go, see?
Yeah.
Listen,
but I've got over 20. I've got about 20 templates on my website, which covers all the different scenarios, which you can download for £3.50. It's less than the price of a coffee.
You're a star.
It covers all the legalese jargon, and it can save you up to £100 a time.
That sounds like a plan to me. Scott, thank you so much. Scott Dixon from the Complaints Resolver on the new changes to parking measures in private car parks across the UK. Useful information that I think we need to know.